If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings? But you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa.
And here we go one more time. Wide right turn coming your way. Joey Carenti back out on the road, but got to meet up with my good friend Tom Kelly. And you know we love getting together and talking to you guys even when we got tons of stuff going on. We're going to get into it here in just a second. But first, going to give you a little preview of what we're going to talk about tonight. The big situation over the last week, the back and forth, the griping, the bitching, the moaning. Who's in the Freedom Caucus? Who's not? Who thinks they're cute with their little answers that aren't really answers? What does it mean? Everybody's doing their own stories on it. We're going to start with the recording of the morning show with Jake from Cowboy State Daily. And I will say, yes, I did get permission from Cowboy State Daily to use this content. And I'm going to let you know that was important because not everybody always does. Some people will record you without your permission or knowledge. Some people will slide a recorder under your door or bug your office. Some people will steal clips right out of your podcast and use them, but we don't do that here. I mean, I'm an asshole, but I'm not that asshole. So let's get going with this sound clip. We're going to listen to what Claire McFarland and Jake had to say about what Claire had written in Cowboy State Daily. And then Tom's going to come in. We're going to chit-chat about some of the aftermath, the blowback, and what else it leads to. But here is Claire McFarland with Cowboy State Daily.
I want to talk about the story Jackson and I did last Wednesday asking people if they're in the Freedom Caucus.
Oh, yeah. You know, because once and for all, you know, we have this nebulous, what is the Freedom Caucus and who wants to raise their hand and say, I'm in it. Good. I love it that you
we're tired of not knowing. Yeah. Like we would write something that didn't call someone out as not being Freedom Caucus, and we'd get an email from them like, I'm not Freedom Caucus. You gotta call me out as not. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
I don't know who the members are, and y'all are public officials, and we don't know. And our people want to know, like our readers want to know. And it's interesting to me that some on the right have taken it as an attack. Like, they're attacking. Like, no, we just want to know who's in it. Like, our readers want to know. Like, people actually, like, there's actually a clamor of people. And, you know, on the right for a decade plus, it's been, like in the federal realm, the deep state. We don't know who's in the deep state, and they're conspiring against us. And, you know, thanks to Chevron, I think there actually is a deep state. The Chevron case, which has now been overturned, but that's notwithstanding. And so it's like, you know, who's in the deep state or who has been to Epstein's Island? And so it's just from the right for years, there's been this who. We want to know who in our public service spheres are associated and what they're doing and who they are and who's doing what. But then you turn the question on a group on the right and they had a freaking meltdown. And I'm getting emails, people calling me leftist and communist. And firstly, I have called out the Wyoming Democratic Party for trying to hide its finances. I have exposed the content that was in controversial books across Wyoming's libraries. I broke the Kappa Kappa Gamma lawsuit. I was the first mainstream reporter to break into the whole diesel delete issue that Troy Lake was involved with. And then the moment I ask who people are in a right-wing group, I'm getting called a communist. And I'm amazed at the intellectual dishonesty that I'm seeing across Wyoming.
Tell us how you really feel. Because I think we've seen when it suits people to be associated with the Freedom Caucus, that's great. When all of a sudden you don't want to be in that club, you get this nasty email saying, I'm not FC. They should all be required to wear the red hat with FC on it. And we got to know who's who. If you're in that group, claim you're in that group. That
is the transparency stance. And, you know, for people who work outside the press, transparency is like something you apply to your enemy. You know, like when I held a torch to the Wyoming Democratic Party, everyone on the right was like, yeah, transparency, it's time for that. But Better Wyoming and some other groups have been like, oh, you know, you just look at their voting records. Like, well, Tom Kelly is one that I argue about. Like, they're like, Tom Kelly's a follower. He votes with Rachel Rodriguez Williams 83% of the time or something like that.
Yeah.
But like, I've covered Tom Kelly close enough that like he can be fiercely independent. I've seen him just gouge Freedom Caucus backed bills like publicly and then rewrite them or, amend them at length and blast them. And so I don't know that we can even go fully the Better Wyoming route and be like, well, this person generally votes with the Freedom Caucus, so that's what they are. I don't even think we can do that. And I'm not out to call people liars. I just wanted to ask the question and get some answers.
Yeah. I mean, this is the confusion created when you make a club within a club, when a caucus within an officially recognized party adopts some of the party line and some not of the party line. And it's so nebulous. And when you ask for a straw poll, and then you get people who, either hang up on you or say, look at my voting record, or claim they're not in the club or in the club. It's like KKK stuff. Are you wearing the hood on the weekends or are you not? Nobody wants to be in the club if it doesn't suit them. And
well, I like a lot of people in the Freedom Caucus. I don't know that I could go so far with that.
Wow, yeah.
And that's another thing, too. Like, holding a torch to any group doesn't mean that we dislike them. When cops are sued, I report on it. Why? Because you hold your darlings to account to preserve those institutions. If you care about an institution, you hold it to account. I think the whole Fox News infotainment sphere has kind of taken that from us.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just did a bad thing calling out a specific news organization.
I mean, it's legitimate of a reporter to say, look, if almost every day I'm reporting politics and I refer to a group as Freedom Caucus says this, I'd like to know who I need to define the Freedom Caucus. Help me.
Who are we talking about?
Yeah. I mean, Claire, you're the best.
You're the best. Thank you.
Well, that's what it was when they talked about it anyway. Of course, there was an article in the Cowboy State Daily last week about it. But Tom, what say you? And welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. I am humbled and a little tickled of Claire McFarland riding in with her shining armor to protect me. That was so sweet of her. To her credit, though, that is an honest journalist, especially in the wake of being called some leftist journalist. She definitely strives to be as objective as she can. But, the whole idea of who's in the Freedom Caucus, who isn't in the Freedom Caucus, overall, all I see is that the Freedom Caucus is winning the argument on the issues. So what we have to do now is vilify the Freedom Caucus and vilify anyone associated with them. Because if we argue the issues, if you're in the opposition, then you lose. So let's try and discredit them and anyone with them. And I have to say I'm a little disappointed in Jake for that implication of the Freedom Caucus being like the Klan. Are you kidding me? Really? The KKK? It's like, who wears the hood on weekends? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. But I'm dealing with this in recalibration. And I'm part of that. And it turns out I've been a louder voice in that than I intended to be. I figured being the new guy, I would sit and listen and just vote appropriately, but just hasn't been my lot in life in general. People ask me what I think, and for some reason people care. So here we go. We're dealing with this from a multitude of different angles. Now, she mentioned Better Wyoming, who is clearly a progressive group who pushes policies that are much more aligned with the Democratic Party than even the moderate Republicans in Wyoming. And there's also another group that I'll get to later that calls themselves Wyoming Grit. We'll make fun of them later. But I want to go back first to the Wyoming Education Association, because that's who I've been butting heads with for a while. Being a conservative Republican, being on recalibration, and being somebody who is dead set against the agenda of the National Education Association and the Department of Education, the WEA is a subsidiary of that. I've been really disappointed with the whole narrative of the Freedom Caucus is looking to destroy education. They've recently had a post that says, did you know it has been more than 15 years since the legislature fulfilled its constitutional obligation to properly fund our state's public education system? That is factually correct. In fact, my understanding, it's been 20 years since it's been done correctly, that we're currently using right now the wage index from 2005. It's that badly out of whack.
I got to jump in and stop you. The way they said it is not factually correct. What they're trying to say is what you guys are doing in recalibration is supposed to be done every 5 years. But what they said is you have not constitutionally funded education. But the legislature has every year. They just haven't engaged in the recalibration, looking at how they're funding. The recalibration bill is not going to automatically appropriate dollars to education. It's going to be a model that the budget will be based on. So every year that we've passed a budget that had funding for education that the state of Wyoming didn't get sued for, which is not a lot of years, we get sued for education all the time, has nothing to do with recalibration. And if you guys haven't done it for 15 years, and this is the first time the WEA is saying something about it, how educated are they? They waited a decade and a half to raise a stink. No, I think some of those words in there are being played with a little bit.
Well, we'll come back to the words of, quote, properly fund momentarily. But okay, I'll grant that, because obviously I wasn't in the legislature 15 years ago. I wasn't in Wyoming 15 years ago. Only been here 6 years. And that's where that whole idea comes from, these out-of-state interests in the Freedom Caucus, that type of thing. But this is the part that really got me. And I've called this out on Facebook. I have a candidate/personal account. I don't have separate candidate and personal accounts on Facebook because I'm the same person. It didn't make any sense to me. I don't have a political facade. What you see in person is what you see politically. Although I may use fewer F-bombs and shave and put on a tie instead of a biker jacket, it's still me. But they say, don't be fooled by the comments of the Wyoming legislature's recalibration committee. They are misleading the public as to the, quote, raises they say they intend to give teachers. Horseshit. Absolute horseshit. I'm on the recalibration committee, and I've met with Senator Rothfuss and Representative Yin, and I've met with the 3 members of the Freedom Caucus on the recalibration team of 12. It's a clear minority. And all looked at the model and said teacher pay is way out of whack, that we spend more per pupil than over 40 states, but we are in the bottom half of teacher pay. Something is seriously wrong. We need to make sure that our professional educators are compensated for the jobs they're doing. And if we want a world-class education system, we need world-class educators, which we will not get if we're paying them peanuts. They will go to other states. So this whole idea that we're misleading the public, it's disingenuous. I'll come back to the Freedom Caucus thing, but I have to tear into this a little further because I'm looking at other states. I'm looking at what the NEA says across the country. And I went to the most expensive public schools in the country, and that's New York City. And they've just recently raised their public spending on education from $40,000 per student. Wyoming's about $22,000, and we're in the top 10. New York is number 1, and New York City is number 1. They will be spending in this upcoming school year $42,000 per student. That's almost twice of what we're spending in Wyoming. And 3/4 of their 8th graders are not competent in reading or math. So I asked the WEA, I've asked them directly on Facebook, what's your number? What does it mean to, quote, properly fund our educational system? Because I know the NEA is not happy in New York. It's $42,000 per student, and they're out there right now wanting another $10,000 a year increase for paraprofessionals. Now, I'm not going to argue the fact that paraprofessionals are underpaid in Wyoming. They are. And I've said it in the recalibration committee, because you can get paid more making sandwiches at Subway than you can as a paraprofessional in Sheridan, Wyoming. And that's wrong, because I know paras work as hard as the teachers do. And the only thing that's missing is the degree and the certification. They haven't gone to school, but they know what they're doing, and they work with kids. And the paraprofessionals are definitely doing it for the love of education and the children, not the pay because they can make more money filling baskets at Walmart. And that is a fact in Sheridan, Wyoming. But my point remains that spending $42,000 per student in New York City is still not enough for the teachers union. So I'll challenge the WA here. What's enough? How much do teachers get paid? What does it mean to fully fund or properly fund our state's public education system? Because until you have an answer, an actual number, we don't have a conversation here, because I'm convinced no matter what we do, the answer will be not enough. No matter how high teacher pay goes, not enough. It has to be more at that point. And I love the fact they had to acknowledge that this recalibration committee, despite our differences, is united in significantly increasing teacher pay in the state of Wyoming that they have to write it off as something being misleading, that there's something nefarious behind it, that we're actually really trying to screw the teachers over. I have to go into some more of their language from a Facebook post not too long ago. Let's be clear. The Freedom Caucus and the Legislators' Select Committee on School Finance Recalibration seem to be misleading Wyoming residents and ultimately trying to, quote, buy teacher support, all while continuing to violate the Wyoming Constitution, blatantly ignoring the court's order and dismissing the needs of students and teachers in the hope that voters won't notice. When the Recalibration Committee met in Casper, the purpose was to discuss the preliminary recommendations of the education funding consultants and to move forward with a recalibration bill for consideration during the 2026 legislative session. While on the surface, some of the movement seemed positive, it's worth a deeper dive into these issues. And keep in mind that it's been 17 years, our previous post said 15 years, or the later post said 15 years, since the legislature has properly funded, there's that term again, education is required by the Wyoming Constitution, exclamation point. And then they continue on with a bunch of the issues, class size, teacher insurance, something I have an issue with, and I'll come back to. And they finish off with, remember, these so-called raises are not a win for our educators. They're hoping it keeps you silent. Come off it. They admit that we are committed to making sure educators are paid their worthwhile efforts in the classroom, because it's not easy teaching. I've been a teacher, and when people talk about they're nothing but glorified babysitters, they have no idea what they're talking about, what it's like to spend so much time with other people's children, and you don't have the luxury of being able to withhold their allowance or take their cell phone away or those types of things. You have to stay within the parameters of what's allowable in the school, get their behavior under order, and get them to learn something at the same time. It is a painstaking, difficult job that I fully appreciate. So I don't appreciate the distortion of my motivations on the council to make sure teachers get what they deserve at this point. And this idea of being lumped in the Freedom Caucus, what, we're trying to bribe teachers with higher pay? Is that your narrative? We're trying to purchase their silence? Go ahead, Joey, because obviously I'm ramped up and I'll keep going.
You guys would have to deal with this anyway because you're doing a full recalibration. What's going to come out of recalibration? What's going to work or get through in the session? Or I'm actually predicting myself a continued effort of recalibration, at least next interim, maybe beyond that. But this is a huge thing. This would be a slice of the pie you guys would not have to spend so much time on. When last time, which is last year, when the legislature gave money specifically for teachers who teach to have raises, they didn't get them. 47 out of 48 districts did not get the raises at the percentage they were funded. What happens when you give that money to the school districts is it comes in the form of a block grant, a little bit of sideboard at best. But they said, oh, we're making up for all the raises we've already given them. And then we had to apply those raises to our administrative staff. But they didn't give it to the custodians or the bus drivers. So instead of giving that money directly to an 8-some-odd% raise for teachers who teach pay, every superintendent got a raise. At least the same raise they gave the teachers by percentage, which means it's more money because they already make more money, which has inspired a series of conversations about taking the teacher pay out of the model and siloing it because stuff like that happens. I believe it was Senator McEwen who made the amendment proposal, and we're going to look at this at the next meeting, of capping the disparity between teacher pay and superintendent pay to 2 1/3 times of each other. And that's when everybody went insane on the school side. You had superintendents in the room going, nope, this is not going to work. I have got to make 2.5 times more than the state superintendent of public instruction, not my teachers. So they kind of led this committee into having to have this conversation in this manner by their own actions of last year with that money that was given to them to handle this issue.
One thing I will say in defense of some of the school districts, particularly the 3 school districts in Sheridan, who are at the top of the list for the largest raises that were given out based on our extra funding we appropriated last year for that. It was intended to be an 8.5% increase in salary, and they were in the 6 point something range. And I know that they gave honest efforts to give teacher pay, and then some of that went to increased healthcare expenses. But I do know that most districts gave raises less than the rate of inflation, thus cutting teacher pay, and some gave a flat 0, which is just an absolute insult, because the bill specifically said if you don't use this for teacher pay, you have to give it back to the legislature. We never got it. We have no idea where it went, but I don't want to go on that. I want to stay on this narrative about the Freedom Caucus trying to screw over teachers with higher pay. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. The WEA has also touted the left-wing group, and I mean that. I get some people say anyone who disagrees with them is left-wing. We got Donald Trump calling anyone who disagrees with him a rhino or left-wing. But Better Wyoming is a left-wing group. They push left-wing causes. And they had to say, and this is a post that was shared by the WEA, talking about their efforts to fight for teachers. Now remember, it's the Republican Party and the conservatives who are leading the charge to increase teacher pay after it has not kept up with inflation for the last 15 to 20 years or so. They're taking credit for it. They say these efforts are already paying off. Members of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, there they are again, the villains. I hear the music. If only I had that movie trailer voice where I could say Wyoming Freedom Caucus with that ominous sound to it, but I can't. Members of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus entered this year's recalibration, pushing for deeper cuts to K-12 funding. Again, complete horse shit. There was never a move to cut spending for public education. The plan has always been to have sustainable increases. We've always looked at it and said, why are we spending so much per student and the teachers aren't getting paid squat? Why has administration ballooned so much? Why are administrative salaries up, but teachers are not? There was a clear disconnect. Why do these districts have these brand new swimming pools and brand new sports complexes while the teachers are on food stamps and getting summer jobs? That's wrong. So to claim that there was an effort to cut funding for public education is a flat out lie. They will point to ESAs, which the WEA and Better Wyoming are patting themselves on the back for helping to shut down through the courts, came out of the general fund. The so-called left fighting more spending on education, not less. The problem was the spending wouldn't have been on the public school monopoly. But again, flat out lie, unless they're really that ignorant and stupid, and I don't believe they are. So they're lying that we are trying to cut K through 12 funding. Oh, he said we. He admitted he's part of the Freedom Caucus. We'll come back to that. But public advocacy has stopped those plans. Again, non-existent plans. In response to this, in their latest committee meeting, lawmakers recently agreed to increase the average teacher salary in the funding model to $70,000, a significant improvement over current levels, which left teachers some of the lowest paid in the country. That's partially true. Before we had our first meeting, when we spoke informally, when we spoke in the hallways of the legislature, when we talked back and forth in emails, we all agreed. Democrats, Republicans, Freedom Caucus, non-Freedom Caucus, liberals, conservatives, moderates. Teachers are getting screwed in Wyoming for the amount of work they put in there. Maybe we don't agree on how to do things. Maybe we don't agree on the exact levels, but we all agreed one thing. Teacher pay had to be raised. It had nothing to do with Better Wyoming sending these letters calling us Nazis and fascists and telling us to properly fund and fully fund schools. In one ear and out the other, as long as you're spreading that narrative that we are trying to cut pay. And then they continue. Even with this progress, there's still a lot of work to do, and the fight isn't over. Essential positions like school counselors, resource officers, and mental health professionals continue to be underfunded. Without proper investment in these supports, Wyoming schools risk falling short of providing a thorough education which the state constitution requires. Wrong. The state constitution does not require mental health professionals, armed security, and breakfast and lunch for the schools. It requires us to efficiently and effectively provide an equitable public education system for kids across the state. It is the legislature's job to determine what that basket of goods is, not a single out-of-control judge who got stayed by the Wyoming Supreme Court, realizing he was out of his lane at this point. So we are not under those orders to fund all those things to potentially augment a child's education. There's nothing in the Constitution saying we have to pay for school resource officers, that we have to pay for mental health care counselors, and that kids have to eat on the state dime whether or not they need to and whether or not their parents want them to whatsoever. Now, here are the points of contention. We have a draft bill, which I've yet to see because I don't think it's completed. But some of the directives we put in there are based on our paid consultant team, their recommendations. They went out and they compared and contrasts with other professions, with other states, to see what would be a fair and equitable pay schedule and how to handle these things and what the research says on education. And what they came up with has some points of controversy that we will talk about in the next recalibration meeting. And you know what? WEA and Better Wyoming, as long as you're talking horse shit like this, no, I'm not going to take you seriously. As long as you are misconstruing, misrepresenting our efforts and our intentions publicly, trying to create villains where there are none, you have no credibility with me. In one ear and out the other while you're talking, because I don't trust a thing you're saying unless you're going to be sincere in these negotiations in good faith. But one is class size, because there's a recommendation to lower the class size in grades kindergarten through third grade, because that's the most crucial when it comes to reading. And then research shows that larger class sizes above those first four grades, kindergarten through third grade, are not as important. And I asked teachers and I asked advocates in the recalibration committee, when asking about whether or not teachers will accept a job or what's attractive for a job, what is more important, class size or salary? And they said far and away it's salary. The teachers aren't that worried if they're going to have 21 or 25 kids in their class. They're more worried if they're going to get paid $55,000 a year or $70,000 a year, because they can handle a handful of extra kids to be able to pay their rent or their mortgage at that point. But class size will be an issue because the recommendations from the consultant were to reduce the class size for the lower grades and increase them for the upper grades. Of course, Better Wyoming and WA only focus on the increased class size for upper grades, nothing about the smaller class size for lower grades. There's also a contentious point over insurance, because there is a proposal that all teachers being paid by the state will be part of the state insurance program. I have not looked at all the ups and downs of that yet. I haven't looked at the pros and cons for teachers. I have talked to superintendents about it. I have talked to teachers about it, and some are not thrilled about this, and I'm not thrilled about it. I am not a proponent of this. I may be in the minority right now, but I'm currently a voice for allowing districts, if they can find more cost-effective and better insurance for their teachers, then they should do that. I'm not a proponent of sweeping everybody onto the state program, whether they want it or not. But again, I'm in the minority on that. In fact, in a private discussion, I had a full-blown temper tantrum, as far as a professional like me may have one, waved my hands around and said, fine, let's go full Hawaii and just abolish school districts and just have a state school district, and we can mandate everything they do at that point, which was my reaction to making every teacher be part of the state program. So this whole idea that Tom Kelly's part of this evil Freedom Caucus, who's going to round up all of these teachers onto the state program, which actually is not a bad program, whether they like it or not, is factually untrue. I've been speaking against it, publicly and privately. And the final thing is, this is a point of contention primarily not with the teachers, but with the administration, the categorical salary grant that you talked about. Because we passed, I think it was $52 million to go directly and immediately to teachers' salaries, and most of it never found its way there. So we said, fine. The block grant model may be coming to an end. We will bifurcate the grant And this portion, do whatever you want with it, school districts, do whatever you need to like you have in the past. But this portion here, educator compensation, nothing else. You will pay for their benefits. You will pay for their pay, whatever it is to take care of the best and brightest in education. You will do that. And of course, we're hearing all these reasons why this is such a bad idea. But we feel like we've kind of been backed into this corner where teachers are not getting what they deserve, where we passed an extra bill for that 8.5% raise specifically for teachers, and it never made it there. We don't know where it disappeared to yet. So I'm not going to be part of any type of movement to try and hunt down those dollars, but I am part of the movement to silo off teacher compensation so the money we appropriate for our educators goes to the educators, so that money ends up in the classroom and not new administrative buildings, not new football stadiums, wherever else it disappears to. We have no idea. Not for more assistant superintendents, not for more administrative assistants who get paid more than teachers do. We're not going to do that. But I'll take a break there and let you jump in there before I move on to Wyoming Grit, because I have to make fun of them too.
Well, I'm really looking forward to bringing this back to, the recalibration is important. It's a perfect example because both of us have been there for just about every minute of it, at least on the public meeting side. But getting back to the why it matters, who's in the Freedom Caucus, who's trying to figure it out, why do people want to figure it out? And I think there are some legitimate efforts. I myself totally admit I asked the question at a Freedom Caucus town hall, maybe a little tongue in cheek, how do we know where to send all the campaign checks? And John Bear explained, and I put that on one of our shows earlier in the year. And, Amy Edmonds, again, I'll admit, good friend of mine. I got a lot of respect for her. She had her own podcast. She did the right thing, also asked my permission if she could use that clip. And she went another direction with it. And some people are really mad about not being able to know, but John Bear had his answer. My thing is, I don't know why it matters. So I'm looking to get back into that conversation when we bring up Wyoming Grit. But I will say, for the time we've been in recalibration, I've heard some things from John Bear that I would expect to hear from any responsible, fiscally conservative legislator, whether they're Freedom Caucus or not, or whether the Freedom Caucus exists or not. And one of them is a pretty serious consideration, I think, right now, of this judge is saying we have to add to the funding model a electronic device for every child, basically a laptop or a tablet, and we have to pay for mental health. Where is the study showing or disproving the link between mental health issues in children and these devices and screen time? So that was just like a screeching halt. And I don't know how anyone would argue that, hey, we need that information, even if it came from John Bear and he's the chairman emeritus of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, or if he wasn't. So really, eventually, the conversation I want to get to is, we know we're going to have another meeting in recalibration. It's finally the meeting where the committee really gets to start doing some work. So far, we've just been listening to the consultant and their assessments, asking questions, and then making draft proposals to LSO. So I'm not too worried about recalibration. I'm worried about people wasting time, distracting, derailing the conversation because they think something like the Freedom Caucus or the Wyoming Caucus matters, and they're not applying it equally on or from both sides. I'm seeing a whole lot of hypocrisy, and I've got my own questions about the Freedom Caucus. But my biggest one is, why does it matter so much when we have so much going on that we need to focus on here in Wyoming?
It matters because an entire political narrative is built on tarring and feathering an entire group as the bad guys in the state right now. And the Freedom Caucus, yes, I do work with, along with working with members of the Democratic Party and everyone else in the legislature. They don't really mind being considered the bad guys by what they consider the liberal press or by the liberal Republicans. That means they're doing their job. But what I'm seeing now is this effort to label anyone who's a grassroots conservative Republican, who's not part of the insider class, who's not part of that group that failed to properly fund education for 17 or 15 years, depending on the WEA post, as somehow the bad guys. And these are some of the things we're seeing here. A new website popped up called Wyoming Grit, which, funny enough, is talking about transparency and honesty, but we have no idea who they are. They put up a web page that had pictures of us. They use like this shady filter to make our pictures from the legislature look really bad. The Freedom Caucus, let's name them and shame them. And I called them on Facebook making fun of the whole thing. And they've since edited their website page. They've edited it to now talk about, I forget, it says something different now about shining light or whatever. But they make this claim here. The Wyoming Freedom Caucus are a block of legislators acting under a national playbook, not Wyoming values. They started muscling into our legislature a couple of years ago and now control a majority of the representatives. They are not homegrown Wyoming conservatives, but instead are recruited or vetted for their willingness to follow orders for an outside agenda. They vote in lockstep, directed by paid staff in Cheyenne, who send texts telling them how to vote. That's not independence, that's control. With 36 members in the 62-seat Wyoming House of Representatives, the Wyoming Freedom Caucus seized a slim majority through the 2024 Republican primaries. They ousted moderate Republicans with a barrage of smear campaigns and nasty flyers, something our state had never experienced before. They brought their national-style ugly politics into Wyoming to match their nationally driven agenda. Who pulls the strings in these efforts? And whose agenda are they really advancing? Wyoming Grit pulls back the curtain on this out-of-state puppet show. There are so many inaccuracies in there, I wouldn't even know where to start, but according to Wyoming Grit, I'm one of the members of the Freedom Caucus who takes orders from out-of-state interests. And I'm the one who started the funny trope about the D.C. overlords. I was the first one who said that, and that's really taken root. As any conservative laughs now, we make jokes about it. Like, well, what do we do on this bill? I'm like, I don't know. I'm still waiting to hear back from my D.C. overlords. They haven't said anything. I'm in contact with no one in D.C., and I think what they're talking about as far as a paid staff in Cheyenne, I think they're talking about Jesse Rubino, who's the director of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus in the state. That's the best I know, but as far as like sending out texts telling people what to do, I have texted legislators and gotten texts from them during votes. Rather than get up around the room and ask people questions, you send out to a group of people at once. I've done that. If that's what they're talking about, then maybe there'd be instances where you could make an argument that I told the Freedom Caucus what to do, but I guess that depends on your perspective. The number 36, I'm not sure where they got that from, but I think maybe the best I can come up with is that there's another group where you can't tell exactly who they are, although they do have members on their website now called Honor Wyoming, who did a bill review of the legislators in the last session, and they came up with 36 representatives they considered high integrity. And that's the same number that Wyoming Grit has that they consider the Freedom Caucus. So maybe that's where they pulled 36 out of their rear ends. They went to Honor Wyoming and said, this is everybody in the Freedom Caucus. Everybody Honor Wyoming likes is in the Freedom Caucus. And I publicly disagreed with Honor Wyoming because they called like Mike Yin and Carly Provenza low integrity. And I'm like, that's wrong. They voted exactly how they campaigned. I thought they kept up their integrity because they told the public, this is who we are, and that's how they voted. I thought that was high integrity. So whoever Honor Wyoming is, I disagreed with their portrayal of high versus low integrity. But nonetheless, that's the best I can come up with as far as Wyoming Grit goes. They've since changed their website to say that allegedly these 36 people get financial backing from the Wyoming Freedom PAC and the Young Americans for Liberty. That's partially true. It's ironic, though, that those are the two groups that supported me. I don't know if they supported all 36 other people, but there are a couple things to know about that. First of all, the Wyoming Freedom Caucus asked me if they can endorse me. They called me up and said, we talked about it and we'd like to endorse you. Would you like that? And I thought it over for a second and I said, this is a great idea. This is a win-win because I am a long-haired educator from Colorado/Illinois. And many people in the Sheridan area aren't sure if I'm really conservative. Does he just talk a good game and then he's going to get in there and beat some long-haired pot-smoking guy from Colorado? Never been high in my life, but you know how stereotypes are. And I said, yeah, that's good. Your endorsement lets people know that you believe I'm conservative. That helps me. But the flip side, I see in the media this narrative of you guys walking lockstep and taking orders and being told what to do. Nobody's going to believe you guys are telling me what to do. Well, apparently somebody out there is trying to make that argument. But the Wyoming Freedom PAC sent me exactly $0.00. I've got no contributions from them. They did send out some flyers attacking Gail Simmons, which ended up in the news, which I was quoted in the news saying I did not appreciate the tactic. It's not my style. But freedom of speech as far as that goes. That's what they like to do. They asked if they can endorse me. I said yes, and I think it worked out for both of us as far as that goes. Young Americans for Liberty, they had almost nothing to do with the candidates. All of a sudden, I started seeing flyers. One got mailed to my house that was inaccurate, that said I was the incumbent rep. I had to go out and do damage control saying, these are not my flyers. I don't know who this is. They saw somebody running for office who was in line with their principles, so they started promoting my name. Nothing to do with me, no contact with me, and even actually had some factual errors that I had to go out and correct at that point. And here's the irony I find of all that. The Wyoming Freedom PAC is much more Trump-like, make America great again, red hat wearing. Young Americans for Liberty is much more libertarian group than a hardcore conservative group. So imagine that, Wyoming Grit. I got endorsed by a conservative group and a libertarian group, and I just happen to be a conservative libertarian. Who could have thunk that for a second? So let's look at that honestly. These groups didn't back me because I promised to do their bidding. They went around, they looked at the candidates, they saw I was running against a more traditional, moderate Republican, and decided at worst I was the lesser of two evils and backed the more conservative, libertarian-leaning candidate. That somehow translates, and I'm being told how to vote. Pay some attention, and I defer back to our objective reporter, Claire McFarland, which I was thoroughly entertained by, to see her waving her hands around about how ridiculous it was to claim that the Freedom Caucus was telling me what to do. Congrats, Wyoming Grit, whoever you are. You undermine your entire argument by trying to say that somehow somebody's grabbing me by the ponytail and telling me what to do.
Or what Claire didn't do is say that it matters or that it means this. She went out and she asked the questions to the legislators. Some responded, some didn't. Some responded, like I said, in what maybe they thought was a cute and snarky manner and would not say directly. But there was a reasoning behind her, and it wasn't to embarrass anybody. It wasn't to paint anybody a certain way. It's because of things that people in the public see that the Wyoming Freedom Caucus puts out themselves. And I have the same questions. I don't care. But when I see stuff like this, I got to ask. If you go to the Wyoming Freedom Caucus website, under the facts page, it's literally called The Facts. Their first statement there is problem solution focused. We are committed to transparency and accountability. And for someone like me, that immediately raises the question of, if you were transparent, I could hold you accountable. But I can't hold somebody accountable because you're not transparent about who's on your team. I digress. We provide factual information. Well, at least they didn't say we provide all facts, but not only that, but we believe in empowering you with knowledge. Well, people can read that and be like, well, yeah, but you don't, because the one thing we really need to know is who are we and do you really do these things? Because we don't see you really doing these things. I don't care who's in the Freedom Caucus. I don't like or dislike people based on their personalities, in politics anyway. It's always about the policies, and still it doesn't get, oh, I don't like you. I want to disagree with your position. I'm not going to work to help you get that passed. I'm going to help put lipstick on that pig, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter to me, except for it's an organization of Republicans, and I'm a Republican, and they make certain statements, and we don't know who they are. Further concern, back in October, about a month ago, there was that dust-up between a Freedom Caucus-sponsored Turning Point USA event on the same night as an event for the Laramie County GOP. Things were said, and people made accusations of the Freedom Caucus and the state party treasurer coordinating together, and there was a quote in Cowboy State Daily in a story by Claire McFarland that was not salacious at all. She just fairly covered both sides with facts and data. But the chairman of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, Rachel Rodriguez-Williams, said, only members of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus represent the ideas and actions and can make statements on behalf of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. That's a good, strong position to have. But how do we know who is allowed to do that? Does it always have to come from John Bear or Rachel Rodriguez-Williams? Otherwise, we don't know. I've had people ask me this. And yes, I'm talking grassroots common folks that get frustrated over what they see as the appearance of corruption or stupidity. And I'm just like, no, I think you're taking it a little far, but it is a legitimate question. How can you say this is what you believe and do, and this is who you limit responsibility for, but you won't tell us who those people are? Now, what people want to do with that information, I don't know. In fact, I could dream up a lot of stuff. Me, I just want the principles to match the posture. Most recently, we had the Wyoming GOP State Central Committee meeting, and on the Freedom Caucus's own Facebook page, they posted a bunch of pictures promoting the event and their presence at the event, which I think is great. Quote, the Wyoming Republican Party event in Torrington this evening was full of energy and enthusiasm. A number of our members were present, expressed appreciation for the conservative message delivered. And in that post, you have pictures of Representative Scott Smith, admitted member of the Freedom Caucus, good guy, nicest guy you'll ever meet. Ken Pendergraft, he's a guy. I've met him. He's also a member of the Freedom Caucus. Then there's a picture of Ann Lucas standing next to, by the way, Ann Lucas is a member of the Freedom Caucus, Steve Johnson and Nina Weber. These are two people that didn't answer Claire's question directly. One of them said, I have a lapel pin. The other one wouldn't respond. So that's confusing to people. The post says our members had a good time. Now there's pictures of these people who haven't answered the question, but the organization says they're all about transparency and accountability. So I can see why people want this question answered. And honestly, because I don't care, I think it's just quicker to answer the question and move on, because we got a lot of work to do, Wyoming.
Yeah, and I could only speak for myself. They asked me about it. I got a text from Jackson Walker, who helped clarate that article. Says, just want to clarify, are you a member of the Freedom Caucus? And I sent back, no. They asked me to join, and I told them no. Point blank. I don't understand why everyone just can't give an answer one way or another, why they wouldn't, but I can't speak for them. But I can say this. People have asked things like, well, why do you work so closely with the Freedom Caucus? And I'll give you a very clear answer, and it's pure pragmatism. Number one, Ken Pendergraft is a member of the Freedom Caucus. He's another representative from Sheridan. We work very closely. District 29 and 30 are right next to each other. We represent a lot of the same people, even though we're two different districts, the city of Sheridan, the county of Sheridan at that point. So I have to work with Ken Pendergraft to help represent the city of Sheridan. The majority floor leader, Scott Heiner, is Freedom Caucus. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I'm on recalibration, and he's on the recalibration team. John Baer is Freedom Caucus. The Speaker Pro Tem, Jeremy Haroldson, is Freedom Caucus. The Speaker of the House, Chip, is Freedom Caucus. You don't get anything done in the House of Representatives unless you work with the Freedom Caucus. And why would I have a bad working relationship with people that I agree with 80 to 90% of the time? Yes, I'm a pain in their ass sometimes because I see things differently. And even remember the ultrasound bill?
Exactly.
I got hung out to dry for that one. So going forward in this, I can't take seriously Better Wyoming. I can't take seriously the Wyoming Education Association. Tate, I love you. I love working with you. But as long as the organization is putting out those types of posts with divisive rhetoric, misrepresenting who we are and what we're trying to do, it's hard to have an honest public conversation. And I agree on the other side when people are talking about how the WA is a bunch of communists trying to make all our kids into little Stalins. That doesn't help either, which is why you don't hear me saying those things, because we have to work together. Wyoming Grit, whoever the hell you are, you've already discredited yourself. So that's enough of those people. I'm just saying, as we go forward into recalibration, you will see come out of this a bill that will significantly improve the lot of teachers in Wyoming. But that doesn't change the fact that we have many challenges that are not Wyoming only. And you had mentioned something about what John Baird said about the screens and mental health. That's something we're looking at. I brought up the crazy idea that we get screens out of the classroom in K, first and second grade altogether. Bring back pencils and paper. Make kids read books again, because all the research shows it does better, that we do a much better job at learning how to read and how to construct letters when they have to actually make them, not just identify them. We've talked about that in the past too. We have issues with broken families. Mental health is an issue across the spectrum in the United States, of all age groups. I understand that these are serious problems. We cannot tackle them adequately from a state-centered approach. I don't believe that. And that's why I see eye to eye, throwing a height joke here, often with the Freedom Caucus, because this is a group of people who believes firmly in family and God and community to tackle these problems, not to hand these things over to the almighty state to take care of them. And those are my libertarian leanings. You look like you're dying to say something there, Joey.
I'm just not surprised that you're not interested in taking care of certain things like fixing this problem by allowing a measured and reasonable amount of corporal punishment. Come on, guy, fix the problem.
Oh, the school discipline bill. Yeah, that's going to come out. That I was somebody who's very interested in supporting the idea of a teacher's bill of rights / school discipline bill. So I'll go off on that tangent as long as we have a couple minutes. We had a bill come up in the education committee recently, which was overly prescriptive for me, pretty much telling all the districts they had to come up with these certain discipline policies, and then was quite prescriptive in what those discipline policies would be, including the idea that if a child has been removed from the classroom for being disruptive, that the teacher would have to give written permission to let that kid back in the classroom. Because we had heard too many horror stories about a kid who keeps disrupting a classroom, gets sent on to the principal, he gets a pat on the head, gets a lollipop, and gets sent back to the classroom to continue disrupting it. While I supported the intention of this, to stand up for the rights of teachers to be able to control their own classroom, to maybe hammer administrators a little more to back teachers and not be so worried about lawsuits because a kid got kicked out of the classroom because the kid was out of control. The bill really came across to me as what I say it was a ready, fire, aim bill. Because we were talking about how many of the problems we have with discipline right now, we don't have sufficient data on it. I'd asked the Wyoming Department of Education that this bill says that the school districts will comply all this data about suspensions and disciplinary actions, send them on to the Wyoming Department of Education, who will then send it on to the Interim Education Committee. To which I said, what good is this for the WDE to collect all this data, send it to an organization of changing membership who only meets a handful of days out of the year? What's the point of this? And the WDE pretty much only said, well, more data is a good thing, which was not a convincing answer to me. I had a parent testify from the Moms for Liberty who said this would be useful. This data were maybe on the websites so we could see which school districts are having problems with suspensions and we have problems with violent behaviors, and maybe we could address it as such. But I wanted to bring up to the committee, unfortunately, discussion got cut off before I got to bring it up. Suddenly a vote was there, and I didn't get to necessarily say what I thought about it, was that we needed to first collect the data and see what the issues were, and then have a bill based on that data, rather than pass this bill prescribing to the districts what they needed to do for discipline, and then collect the data on discipline. Thus why I said it was a ready, fire, aim bill and why I voted against it. So that's what happened recently in education as far as that goes. I like the idea of addressing school discipline and backing up teachers so their administration will have their back when they're having problems with behavior in the classroom. But I didn't like the idea of this top-down approach where we're telling all the districts what we're going to do based on data we had not even collected yet.
Yeah, always a problem. And I don't know why we always get to the end of an interim and it's, oh, we got to do all this stuff now that we're not ready for. Hey, you know what? Sometimes it takes years or even a decade to get a bill to the legislature, to get someone to take it seriously. It deserves the work. The nuance is where it really happens. And when you rush it, you always get it wrong. You get unintended consequences or extremely intended consequences that are hidden. So anything that's hamstringing you guys this late in the game, getting ready to go into a budget session with recalibration and a slate of already 176 committee bills, not personal bills yet, I'd say, hey, let's make interim topics and get ready to do it later. But everyone's going to do what they want to do the way they want to. I don't get to do that. I have to follow all these meetings around and sit there and wait till I get a chance to talk so I can be openly ignored. But maybe that'll change here pretty soon. I've had a few interesting job offers lately. I may be taking one of them on sooner than later. So we'll see how all that goes. But Tom, got a couple minutes left. Anything else you want to throw in there as we wrap it up tonight?
There was one more thing that came up, as long as we're talking education tonight. It was the literacy bill. And I had a serious problem with this because we have so many people in Wyoming, so many kids who can't read. And this literacy bill was meant to address that. And all I saw was we have a monster state system in which kids are not learning to read. So the bill was to increase the size of the system. It was to increase the size of the Department of Education, hire a new full-time employee for the literacy division, require more training, more professional development for teachers, increase the standards for hiring teachers at this point. And while I agreed with a lot of the testimony that many of the reading techniques that have been used in the past obviously are not working, and while I agreed with the approach for the reading that was being presented by the advocates, I voted against the bill because, again, it was the state dictating curriculum to all the districts. And the problem I had with that was I think the curriculum is correct. And I spoke with an advocate about this afterwards. She was surprised I voted no. And I said, on the policy, on the curriculum, you're correct. But I'm looking at this from a higher level view that this is the state dictating curriculum to all the districts. I don't like that precedent because one time in the future, the state may be dictating the wrong path forward. I like the idea of districts having the freedom to do what works in their communities, to experiment. And as soon as the state puts in the statute, you will use this system and no other, we've got a problem here. So while I agree this is the correct reading system, I don't think this is the correct avenue by which we would deliver this. So you can probably expect to see that more from me in the budget session. And this is something else you'll probably see from me in the budget session. I will be treating this as my first and last budget session. So while my first session in the general session, I might have been a little more taciturn than people know me to be. And of course, being sick with the flu for 2 weeks shut me up a little bit too. You may see me be a little bit more forceful on the floor, speaking for and against things, because I don't want to be on my deathbed thinking to myself, maybe if I would have kept more thoughts to myself. So you'll probably see me vociferously arguing points more than I have in the past, stepping on toes more than I normally do. And if I run for re-election and people say, no thanks, we're sick of you, I can live with that. I can live with being myself. And if I decide this will be my last session because things didn't pan out for me, the life as an elected official, that I'm just not wired for this, God bless, that's as far as things go. But don't expect to see me as timid as I was earlier this year.
Well, that'll be definitely interesting to watch. And in fact, I think you might be saying it just to get me to come over and watch the House instead of the Senate. But like I said, I don't know where this new job or any of the jobs I've been offered are going to take me, which chamber, what parts of the day. Who knows? I might be sent over to spend a lot of time in that gallery in the House to get to see some of that. But either way, there is a lot of time between now and then, and it's all going to go really fast, almost like there's no time between now and then. I am going to shut it down here because I got to get to bed and head down to Cheyenne early in the morning as we are getting some management council meeting to close out the interim. And then I will catch up with Tom again in January as that school recalibration committee meets for its last meeting. In between those two meetings, I got a month of budget prep, and I will try to keep you guys apprised of what's going on and definitely have a conversation with Tom about that before the session starts.
Oh, yeah, we've got the governor's recommendations. Yeah, I'll have a lot to say about that.
We will make sure we make that happen. And while we're doing all that, if you happen to see me or Tom, stop, say hi. And remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but your pro-choice abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes.